Good afternoon, Russell. Hope all is well.
Good afternoon. Good morning. All is well, brother.
Start right off, dive into it. You and McCall have great chemistry. Could you speak to a little bit how this was established?
Well, I think first and foremost, Nicole and I have a history of working together. We met each other back in 1998, working in the theater, working on a play called August Wilson's Jitney, and we toured and did that play for 2 years. Then we did another August Wilson play called Two Trains Running in Los Angeles, and we were in both plays playing opposite each other as young lovers, if you will. And so we bring that level of professionalism, we bring that level of experience, and that level of artistry to the work of and to the characters of Charles and Lucille.
Nice, nice, nice. Um, uh, I know one of the first things we noticed as far as I mean me, like my friends and fellow writers in the series is like you really captured like the Detroit dad thing. And I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I mean, all of us was like, wow, like he got all our dads and uncles like really embodied in that. Was that something that was familiar to you, or did you grasp it right away from the script? Like how, just tell me a little bit about that process.
Well, Khan, I'm born and raised in Oakland. So,
Okay.
they talk about Oakland is very similar to Detroit, I've heard. And so when you talk about the Detroit dad, I know about the Oakland dad. Now,
Okay.
I was raised without a father, but there were many men in my community and a part of my village that helped raise me. And so I looked at the men of that time. I've often said this, that they say there was a time when boats were made of wood and men were made of steel. And so the men who had to go, as it pertains to Detroit, work in those steel mills, work in those car factories and the like. And then we talk about the Black men in Oakland who had to work at the shipyards. All of that is working with your hands. All of that is working with your back. All of that makes you, in that time, was what a man, the figurative look of a man was. And so those men, they worked hard. They raised their children with a certain tone, and they loved hard as well. And so because that was the time and that was the kind of men that were needed. And I think so that's reflected in Charles. You know what I mean? And it was very important that audiences feel that. Do you know what I'm saying? Because I wanted audiences to know that there were men, there were fathers that were present. And also we know that they did not come from a broken home. They came from a broken environment, a broken city, as much a lot of the city. Oakland was bad, New York, Detroit, Chicago, and so, but it was circumstances that caused them to take another path.
Gotcha. Understandable. Okay, so season one, a lot of the family part of the plot is really you and McCole's marriage, and to a certain degree, your struggle to maintain head of household. There's the financial struggle. Is that can you speak to the reality of that for that time period, but also can you hint us where does that go towards next season? Is there still a struggle? Just give us a little insight on that.
Well, what does Wu-Tang say? Cream, cash rules everything around me, right?
Yes, sir.
And so when you don't have it, it can make for an unstable and an unhappy at times, an unhappy home or an unhappy environment. And so we saw a lot of the upheaval that the family had to go through, and more specifically, what Charles and Lucille went through. When you're constantly looking for the money to pay the bills, to get things in the house fixed and whatnot, you have no time for each other. You have no time for your spouse. You have no time for your husband. You don't have no time for your wife. You have no time to, as we often say, to speak soft to each other, right? And so I think we take that from season one, all of those financial struggles that bring us into season two, and we start to see the discord that comes between Charles and Lucille. And so when you have no time to speak softness to each other, then there's no intimacy. Then with no intimacy, there's no lovemaking. And with no lovemaking, there's no joy. And so what do we ultimately do when we don't have these things at home, right? Eyes start to wander and bodies start to move. And so we'll begin to see that sort of manifest into season 2, where Charles and Lucille, we begin to see a fissure that comes between them and begins to create a aspect of a split of sorts.
Gotcha. Okay. Now on the series itself, I don't know if you know, we're Detroit-based. I'm Detroit-based publication, so a lot of these questions are skewed towards that perspective of Detroit. Is there anything you learned new about Detroit? Did your perspective change any just in the script, or talking to Randy, or talking to me, just your knowledge? Just, I guess better ask, how do you view Detroit now versus how you did prior to the script in this process of making this series?
Well, talking to Randy, talking to Miss Lucille, talking to Nicole, documentaries that I've watched about the city and its history. You do, a lot of places say this, but you do, and I think I discovered that Detroit was different in so much as there is a lot of pride in the city. You know what I mean? And there was that, and it's still there. I think that, you see this, I understand now, having been there and having met and know people who are from there, I understand that Detroit versus everybody mentality and attitude. You know what I mean? Because I feel like, because of how the city had thrived at one point in such a way, and then, how there was this steep economic downturn, they were almost left for dead, right? And so people of Detroit had to really sort of band together and find themselves and create a way out of no way, and I think that's what I see of that ideal, that mentality of Detroit versus everybody, because it's like the country, it's like, other cities or whatever, y'all didn't think we could do it. And so I feel like the pride with people who come out of there, like just in, when you look at a Jalen Rhodes, when you look at a Jamel Hill, or Randy Huggins and others of that ilk, of the like, they have a hard and fast, like, pride, because I came up of a time when nobody gave me a shot, but I made a way out of no way. And again, it's just the pride and the resilience of people from Detroit that I really respect. And I see that it's very specific to Detroit. I've been to Chicago, lived in Chicago, know Chicago people from Chicago, but that resiliency is different in Detroit.
Gotcha. And that brings me to my last question. Thank you for answering that. I really appreciate it. Last question. You're a veteran actor. You've been around a lot, and one of the common things here in Detroit, specifically when it comes to urban crime dramas on the big screen or small screen, it seemed like 80% was always Chicago, New York, and LA. You know what I mean? As far as the setting where these stories take place. And even when we would get one, it didn't feel authentic, And so not only does we have one, it feels authentic. You are the cast, you make it feel authentic. And have you been getting that kind of feedback? And can you speak to, I guess, from a leadership standpoint, of what it took, and people say, "Nah, Detroit is like this, Detroit is like this." Was there a lot of that in filming this?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I have to give a lot of credit to Randy Huggins. Him, obviously being the creator and being from Detroit and being of that time, knowing what was going on, knowing the history of BMF, and also obviously being steeped in the culture and still having friends who live there, goes back there, mom's still there, all those kinds of things that contributed to the level of authenticity. I also think that when you bring veteran actors who are soulful, first and foremost, when you talk about myself, Nicole Brianna White, Wood Harris, Steve Harris, and others of that ilk, Wood is from Chicago. Steve is from Chicago. McCole is from Chicago. Now, it's not Detroit, but they understand that spirit, right? They understand that cultural specificity of what it is to be Black, to be a Black of that time. There's a spirit that's in you, being from Oakland, that you can't get a facsimile of that. That got to be in you.
Yeah,
and
right.
So the credit has to go to Randy. The credit has to go to Tasha Smith at the time, and 50, who saw it, who made an effort to cast us, who made an effort to cast these people who have that spirit in them, who understand the cultural specificity of that Blackness. That, as I said, you can't fake it. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't research being colored. You can't research being Black. You can't research being a nigga. You can't research that. That shit's either in you or it ain't. And so that meant that you lived of that time. That meant you ran in those circles. You were part of that world. And it also meant that you were paying attention. And so you bring that to the work. And so what we tried to do was, all the people, the veterans that I mentioned, you try to pour that into the young actors. You're trying to say, listen, but also pay attention. Watch how we approach the work. Watch how we approach certain moments. There's different emphasis that we put on words, different ways that we articulate, certain manners of speech and sentences and everything like that. All those little nuances are purposeful. You know what I mean? And those are the things I think when you talk about there being a difference in an authenticity, that, you know what I mean? That is something that we put effort into, making sure that those things are clear and specific.
Got you. Thank you, sir. I appreciate for your time, and I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of the season and all your other future endeavors.
I appreciate it, Khan. Thank you for the support, brother.
Thank you.